With us now, Jeffrey Epstein's former attorney, Alan Dershowitz, who's, of course, been named in some of these documents. He has been cleared of any wrongdoing in the Epstein case. We just talked, obviously, to Jeffrey Epstein's brother about his death, all the unanswered questions about his death. Now I want to get to the unanswered questions about his life. Have you ever seen a case where the guy who is the main perpetrator is dead, there's no ongoing investigations, his alleged accomplice or his accomplice is now in jail, and yet so many things, the tapes, the logs, the financial records, all remain secret?
No, I've never seen anything like that. And history and truth have its claims. And I'm glad that the media is seeking everything. From the day I was falsely accused, I asked that every single piece of paper, every videotape, every audio tape, every document be released. I waived any right to privacy. I hope there are videotapes of every sexual encounter that ever took place around Epstein, because it would prove that I was not among them.
I get being angry about what happened to you. I understand that. And I appreciate it, and I don't know how else to say it, that you were wrongly accused, and that has come out. Looking forward, though, about what is the people who aren't being accused, the people who are still being protected. Is there any explanation for keeping all of these records still? The FBI's search warrant results, some of the tapes that were recovered, the hard drives, all that. Is there any explanation for the FBI and others keeping that secret other than they're trying to cover up for people?
Well, there's no good explanation. There is an FBI report which names all the names, and the names have been redacted. And I have formally requested the redacting of those names, and the judge hasn't done it, and the FBI hasn't done it. There are people whose names should be disclosed. I'll give you a couple of examples. The Lady Rothschild, who introduced me to Jeffrey Epstein, and we think introduced Bill Clinton to Jeffrey Epstein and maybe Prince Andrew. Her name hasn't come up at all, and yet she was as close to Jeffrey Epstein as anybody could possibly be during the period of time when he was doing some of these things. So that's a name that should be disclosed. There are other names. Leslie Wexner's name has been disclosed.
Who's protecting him?
You know, there are rich and powerful people who have access to both political figures and judicial figures and the media. You've
said that you think that Jeffrey Epstein had blackmail on people of a sexual nature, which would explain why he was getting money to manage and how he amassed some of his wealth. Now that you've seen the latest trove of documents and some of the accusations there, is it clear to you, having been in the law for so long, that there's more out there of a blackmail nature, that there is evidence of blackmail that's being covered up?
I have no doubt about it. And look, Jeffrey Epstein once told me, I said to him when he was being prosecuted, who do you have to worry about? And he, somebody close to him, I mentioned the name, and he said, no, you don't have to worry about him. He's not going to say anything. I have too much on him.
Can you give me some names of people who'd be that powerful that could keep something like this under wraps for so long?
Well, I can tell you part of the fault is with the media. The media does not want to tell the full story. They don't want to get into the fact that some of the accusers may not be telling the truth. A woman named Sarah Ransom, we now know, has told about Hillary Clinton, about Donald Trump, about Richard Branson, about Bill Clinton, about many, many other people. So let's get to the bottom of it. And people should be indicted for perjury. If they lied, even if they were victims,
that's a good point.
If they lied and falsely accused other people under oath, they should be prosecuted.
As you point out, there's so many people who just want this to go away rather than actually uncover everything. It's good to see you, sir. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.